Welcome back to College Questions, where I talk about different things related to college admissions and college applications and answer any of the questions that you all might have about your application process. Today I was going to answer some questions from the internet. I've got two questions that pertain to seniors right now, given that we're sort of at the end of the application season and we're waiting to hear back from colleges. And then I have a bunch of questions that pertain to juniors who should be starting their college application process right now, building those lists and exploring different colleges that you might think about applying to. So, the first question I've got here, this person writes, is it worth emailing colleges to tell them about extracurriculars or ECs that you forgot to mention? I really want to tell the school that I did something which I feel is huge and really shows commitment and also means a lot to me. This is an interesting question because you might be tempted to email admissions officers with corrections or addendums or things that you might want to change or add. I'm going to recommend that you don't. In this student's instance, it sounds like they forgot to include something in their activity list that really should have been included, and they say it means a lot to them, and they think it's huge and shows commitment, but then my question is, why wasn't that in there in the first place? That should have been the first thing at the top of your activity list. In activity slot number 1, should have been that. You also probably should have written at least one essay about this, whether that's for a supplemental or perhaps maybe your main activity or your main Common App personal statement, or perhaps even one of the 4 UC prompts should have been about this activity, or at least the experiences that you had doing this activity. If it's that momentous and that meaningful and shows so much commitment, I'm sure that there are experiences within that activity that are meaningful and worth writing about. So trying to contact admissions to say, oh, by the way, here's this thing I forgot, but it's really, really important. My immediate question is, why wasn't that there to begin with? And so I would say don't bother emailing them. They're probably not going to read it, or if they do read it, it's not going to get added to your application. Otherwise, they're sort of opening the floodgates for students to fill up all 10 activity slots on their application and then send an email saying, oh, and by the way, here are 2 extra things that I did that I didn't include in my activities. Could you please consider those when you're reading my application? And that just opens up a can of worms that colleges don't want to deal with. So if you forget to include something and you've already submitted your application, I think that's the end of the story. Or at least I would say that's the end of the story. I really encourage students to take some time and every year and go in and create like a spreadsheet, or I use a record keeping system where students keep track of all their activities that they do every single year. And so when I'm working with a student, I'm encouraging them every year to catalog what they did, talk about those experiences, talk about what they learned, make a note of about how much time they spent on that activity so that they don't have to remember it, what they were doing as a freshman when they're finally becoming a senior and they're writing out their applications. So if you're already, a junior, maybe take some time, create a spreadsheet and go year by year, freshman, sophomore, junior year, and try to write out what all your activities were and everything that you did that was meaningful to you, and get those juices flowing well before you actually start filling out the applications in the summertime. If you're a freshman, start your spreadsheet now and log everything that you've been doing this year so far so that in the future you don't have this problem forgetting your activities. Another thing that a senior asked about was letters of continued interest. I got an enthusiastic reply from my admissions officer about my letter of continued interest, and I think it really matters. They wrote, "Thank you for advocating for yourself!" Please know that I've added this to your file and you'll hear back from us soon! Is this significant or is this standard? Unfortunately, this is standard. I've even seen some responses to letters of continued interest where a college has commented on the applicant having family members who went there. basically you're a legacy applicant, and they see that personal detail in the email of like, oh, they know that my mom went here, or they know my dad went here, they know both my parents went here, they must have replied to me specifically. That's good, right? Unfortunately, it's not. uh, these days it is entirely possible to make custom form templates, and if a student checks yes, my mom went here, or yes, my dad went here, to sort of fill that in into the email template to say like, we understand that mom went here, or mom and dad went here. And so it looks personal and it feels personal, but it's not actually a personalized email. When they send out these responses to letters of continued interest, there might be a template for legacy applicants, a template for non-legacy applicants, a template for students with portfolios, a template for students with any sort of little thing. They might have a different email template so it feels like they're responding to you specifically, even though they're not. It's all generated by, MailChimp or Constant Contact or one of those sorts of email programs. Um, but they want it to have that slightly personal touch. So I wouldn't read too much into those sorts of email responses. They're usually automated and pretty generic, unless we're talking about a really small liberal arts college, some place that's got maybe 500 to 1,000 kids tops, and they're receiving a few thousand applications, and each reader reads a few hundred. Then they might be able to respond personally to the number of people that they have on the wait list, or it might not be worth it to the college to invest in the software that would allow them to respond to that number of applications automatically. That they just figure they'll do it for free by having the admissions team respond. But at most schools, they're using some sort of software, or it's embedded in their admissions software to send out these emails, and they can make templates and customize it slightly for each student, um, using algorithms and like rule sets for making it sound custom. So I would not read too much into those. For those of you wondering what a letter of continued interest is, that is a letter that you send to schools that have waitlisted you. They haven't accepted you, but they haven't rejected you. They're putting you onto the wait list, and usually they'll ask you for any updates on your academic profile or on your application, any new awards or achievements or milestones in your activities. They'll want to see updated grades. And this is their way of sort of saying, are you interested enough in coming to our school that you're willing to put in the extra work to fill out this one extra essay, this one extra form, give us these additional pieces of information in order to be on our wait list. And this is their way of checking. For some students, they might say, I don't care, I wasn't really going to go to your school anyway, and then those students aren't put on the wait list. But if you really are interested, they'll want to see something back from you before they officially put you on that wait list. Other schools might just automatically waitlist you and not even care. um, some universities are really good about just automatically putting people on wait lists, but especially these private colleges that are trying to gauge applicant interest in order to see like who's more likely to say yes to us if we say yes to them, they might ask for additional documentation in the form of a letter of continued interest. But not all schools want those. So follow the instructions that are provided to you by each college that puts you on a wait list. So those are my two senior related questions so far. Juniors, I had three questions for juniors. One of them, I'm going to start with a silly question. What is the definitive T20 list? By T20, we mean the top 20 colleges. And I hate these sorts of questions. Um, what's a top 50? What's a top 20? What's a top 10? What's a tier 1 university, tier 2, etc., etc.? And, there are lots of ways that students and adults think about how we rank colleges. Some will rank them by admission rate, some will rank them by prestige, whatever that is. Really, well, I think of prestige as marketability. How much brand recognition does a school have? And at least when I think of it in the form of brand recognition, that kind of takes the shine off of the college in that sense, right? It's not about how good they are, how cool they are. It's about how strong their marketing is, right? Like Apple has really strong marketing, but Android users will tell you all day how much Apple sucks. But you can't deny that Apple has a really strong brand recognition and a really strong value associated with that brand. And it's the same with these colleges. So that's how I think of prestige. But what is a top 20 or top 50 or top 100 is really going to depend on what you're looking for and what you want. If you want to talk about schools that are going to be great for pre-med and pre-law, those are going to be very different from the schools that are going to be good for sports management or for sports business. A school like Gonzaga is going to have a really good sports management program. Um, they're amazing at basketball. I know that they have broadcast journalism and broadcast media, and so they're going to be really good at those things. But they might not necessarily be your best pick for some other major, right? Um, where some students might say, "Well, I want to go to Harvard or I want to go to Cornell," and it's like, well, you're not going to go to Cornell to try to end up on ESPN. You could, but you're going to get better connections and better experience going down that road at a number of other universities. And so, what you're looking for is really going to determine what are the best schools. You know, you could even go down to the U.S. News College Report rankings, and they have their sort of overall national rankings, and then they have rankings by major or rankings by field. And if you start digging down into those, you have to pay for that. So I don't recommend doing it. I'm not a huge fan of US News. But if you dig down into the rankings by major or rankings by field, you'll see considerable variability in which schools are at the tops of those lists because different schools are good at different stuff. And so I would encourage you not to think about, Ivy League or what some people call Ivy Plus, which is like the Ivy League plus MIT, Caltech, Stanford, you know, those sorts of USC, those sort of really prestigious, well known universities. I wouldn't think about those as sort of like the best. Instead, I would think about what is it you're looking for? What are you trying to achieve? What are you trying to accomplish? And what are you trying to learn? And what experiences are you trying to have? Because you're going to get, in some cases, better experiences at other schools outside of that Ivy Plus list uh, than you would inside that list, depending on what it is you're looking for. So, is there a definitive top 20 list? Not really. Could you go to Forbes or could you go to US News and just look at the national rankings? You could. And if that's what you're after, if you're after prestige, that's fine. And then you can go look at those lists and check those out. But asking randos on the internet what are the best colleges, my answer is going to be it depends. Here we've got a question. Are rural disadvantages going to kill my applications? They say, I'm from a super remote area. Think the whole county only has 1,000 people. No franchises like McDonald's or even a clothing store. It's pretty remote. And we are super far from any sort of resource. Highly agricultural. I didn't think being a scientist was a real career option until high school. My school has no APs or honors because we only have one teacher for each subject, and that teacher teaches 7th through 12th grade. We also did not have proper science classes for biology and for most of chemistry. My ACT scores, however, are super good. I have a 32 composite. My math is low at 27 because I didn't understand any of the concepts. Our version of pre-calculus is only offered to seniors, so I had no idea what was happening the whole time. The ACT does not test pre-calculus, so I don't know how much that class would have helped them, but whatever. I didn't take the SAT because I didn't know it existed until this year. No research or job experience except for farm work, and I want to major in STEM. How much is my application affected by these factors, and how can I communicate this to colleges? So, there's actually a whole thing called the STARS Network, STARS, STARS. And it's a consortium of, I want to say, 8 or 9 colleges. And they're all very well marketed, reputable, well known universities. Some are research universities, some are liberal arts colleges. But if you look at the list, you will probably recognize the names of 80% of them. And the STARS network, the reason I bring it up is they focus on rural student admission and rural student success. And they're trying to get rural students to think about college as a real option and to get them to go to college. Now, this network does exist, but in general, being a rural applicant's not necessarily going to hurt your chances. Your application might look a little weaker on the face of it. Your GPA is going to be lower. You're not going to have like the California or New York 4.5, 4.7, 4.9 GPAs. Uh, and you're not going to have the 12 AP exams that are all fours and fives. You could self-study and take AP exams remotely, or not remotely, but you can self-study and go take AP exams through other providers. But not everyone's going to be able to do that. And so if you live in a place where you don't have access to those sorts of resources, on the face of it, your application might appear weaker. And so I understand the concern. But once they see what's available at your school and what your school environment is like, they're going to try to take into account a lot of those differences. The struggle is going to be how hard are your classes and how how in depth do your classes go. Those are going to be question marks for them, especially for most colleges, especially if students at your school don't apply to a lot of colleges in general. The universities and colleges aren't going to have a lot of information on your high school and their academics. So they're really going to rely on something that's called a school profile, which is created by your counselor and talks about all the classes, the grading, gives a whole bunch of information, some statistical, some qualitative uh, information on your high school. And they're going to really rely on that to help inform how they look at and evaluate your application. The other reality is that colleges are starting to realize the benefits of having a part-time job. The soft skills, the responsibility, the independence that it engenders, the ability to sort of be punctual and show up consistently and on time. They're seeing the value in that again. Not to say that they devalued it at any given point, but they're starting to sort of see that as a positive thing, as opposed to you know some of these other extracurriculars that students can engage in. And so, having farm work on there, you're gonna have a lot of hands-on experience working in agriculture, which, if you want to do environmental science or agricultural sciences, that's going to be awesome for you. And the experience that you have is going to really support those interests. Now, if you wanted to do neuroscience, maybe slightly different in terms of what experience you have and how relevant it is. But I think for a lot of the biological sciences, the agricultural sciences, and the environmental sciences, your experience farming would be totally applicable and awesome, even though you're not like in a lab doing stuff, right? And so, insofar as that's concerned, I think that that's a net positive for you. The other reality is that colleges are trying to create a diverse student body. And what that means is not just racially or ethnically. They're looking at diversity of thought, diversity of experiences, diversity of interests, and geographic diversity. If we wanted to take college admissions purely on merit, whatever that means. Um, highest GPA, highest test scores, I guess, and just go by that alone, colleges would be completely full of kids from New York, Boston, Washington State, and California, and maybe some Texas. They would comprise most of the students at most of the prestigious universities in this country because they're going to have the highest GPAs, the highest test scores. That's just the way that goes. But colleges don't want a campus full of kids from California and Boston and New York and Texas. They want kids from all over the place. And so they will go out of their way to say, we don't have a lot of kids from Wyoming. So if a strong applicant comes to us from Wyoming, we're going to give that student a good hard look. Or we don't have a lot of applicants from Utah. And so we're going to give applicants from Utah a second look if their academic profile is strong enough that we think they could be successful here. And so being from a rural area can actually be an advantage because you're competing with a much smaller pool of kids to try and get into some of these universities that maybe don't have representation from your region. And so not only are they currently lacking that, but it might be something that they're interested in improving. And so being in a much smaller applicant pool from that region is an advantage, not a disadvantage. Here in the Bay Area of California, a lot of kids apply to these big name colleges, and then they are kind of competing with each other because they're not going to take all 5,000 kids from the Bay Area into their freshman class. A school like Penn State doesn't want to take every single Bay Area kid because that would be a huge chunk of their freshman class. Could be potentially all of their freshman class if they really wanted it to be. And so, being from a geographically diverse location, a location that doesn't normally send a lot of kids to college, as long as your application is competitive for your region, and as long as you write persuasively and authentically about your experiences and your activities and what you've learned, and you talk about, I know I have this setback and I know I have this weakness, and here's what I do in order to try and deal with that, or here's what I plan to do to overcome that in the future, there's no real good reason for being from a rural area to kill your applications. At some schools, we might have some issues with, the college readiness piece and the rigor of our coursework, but there is still going to be plenty of universities that would be very interested in having a student from a rural area who comes from a region that they don't really have a lot of representation from, as long as that student's going to be successful at their school. And that's going to be the one question mark for them. So as long as you can convince them of that, especially with this 32 ACT, which is pretty nice, then I think your application is going to be just fine. That was kind of a long one. Um, I had another similar one about schools that prefer test scores to GPA, and I don't really think that there is a school that won't consider GPA first and foremost. But tests are coming back. Just this week, UT Austin said they're going to want testing again, and they're the fourth school this calendar year so far to say that. So testing's making a comeback. Uh, so here's another question. We're focused on juniors. How many colleges should I apply to? I am an Asian junior in high school in the United States, planning to major in computer science with a 1540 SAT, 780 math, 760 reading, and a 3.94 unweighted GPA with strong extracurriculars. Ooh, that's a lot of information. So, strong unweighted GPA. Don't know what the weighted GPA is. So that's a question mark. How many of those were APs? How many of those were honors classes? I'm assuming a lot with the 1540 SAT score. 780 math is pretty good. You missed one, maybe two questions, depending on the curve for your test, and a 760 reading. Really strong, really strong performance. Um, the other question mark is, what are strong ECs? What are your strong extracurriculars? There's no kind of elaboration there. Strong ECs could be highly competitive summer programs, could be winning national competitions, could be publishing research, could be inventing something cool. No idea what this student did. So that's a big question mark that will impact the list. They say, I have 15 solid colleges on my list that I would be happy to go to, but most people online are saying 15 is too many, while some have applied to more than 20. What should I do? Here is my current list: Stanford, Carnegie Mellon, UT Austin, Georgia Tech, Rice, UIUC, that's University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, UW Seattle, Cornell, Purdue, the UCs, the University of California, I'm assuming not University of Colorado, USC, Duke, Johns Hopkins, Wisconsin Madison, and University of Maryland. I'm assuming they mean College Park, the main campus. So all of those are schools with strong marketing. The other thing this student doesn't say is where they live, because one, two, three, four, six of those are public schools. And so they're going to give preferential treatment to students in their state. If you're a student from California, the UCs are going to be a lot easier to get into than if you're not from California. California just mandated that UC Berkeley and UCLA get their out of state applicants down to around 18% ish of the student body, which means that as a system, the University of California only reserves about 18% of its seats for out of state applicants, which makes it really hard to get into things like computer science at the UC system if you don't live in California. I mean, it's hard even from California, but it's extra hard out of state. Same thing with UW Seattle. UW Seattle, 60% of their seats are for kids in Washington State, which means only 40% of their seats are not. When it comes to a program like computer science, I think their in-state admission rate last year was 25%. Their out-of-state computer science admission rate was 2%. It's harder to get into computer science there than it is to get into Harvard in general. So if you live in Washington State, you have a 12% or 12 times the chance of getting into computer science at UW than you do if you're not from Washington State. So that's the other big question mark here. Just looking at this list, though, Stanford, CMU, Austin, Georgia Tech, Rice, UW, Ivies, UCs, USC, all of these are schools that'll come up within 10 minutes of a Google search of like strong computer science colleges in the United States. Like, these are all schools that most kids are going to know about, which means that they're going to be schools that all of them apply to. I think that's going to be the hardest part of this list. I would really recommend that this student branch out and look at other colleges too. There's some great options out there. The student's profile is very, very high. So most of these schools are possible depending on the student's extracurriculars and depending on where they live. Most of these schools are possible. But, there are other choices out there that would be just as good, and also like strong likely schools or strong target schools. I would recommend that they look at like Stevens Institute of Technology near New York City. I would recommend that they look at like RPI, I always mispronounce it, like Rensselaer Polytech. I would recommend that they look at Rutgers. I would recommend that they look at um, RIT, Rochester Institute of Technology. I would recommend that they look at Wentworth Polytech, which is in Boston. I would look at Colorado School of Mines, which is a really great sort of hands-on engineering and computer science school in Colorado. There are other options out there that are going to be good choices also, that have a much better chance of getting admitted to these highly competitive programs like engineering and computer science. And so they can apply to all of these, but I would also add in some of those other options as well that are going to have slightly better admit rates. If you want to do, if you want to do like Penn State, and I mean Penn State, they're they're not easy to get into either. But you could look at Penn. You could look at what was the other program? It's escaped my brain. It'll come back to me later. But the point being that you want to sort of think outside the box and look at some of these other schools that are going to have decent CS programs, or that are polytechnical institutes, um, that are going to have a higher chance of admission in addition to these schools. This student is highly likely, I think, to get into a couple of these, but you really, depending on the essays, depending on what those extracurriculars are, depending on where the student lives, and depending on what their weighted GPA is, like those are a lot of question marks that I don't have answers to in what they wrote. And so looking at this list, I would not be comfortable with just this list of schools. I think they could apply to up to 20 if they wanted to, if you treat the UCs as one. I think they could apply to up to 20 if they wanted to keep all of these on their list. However, I would also consider dropping some of these in favor of schools with better admit chances, in order to sort of balance out their list entirely. You know, if they really want to do like Stanford or USC, maybe I would pick one. Or if they wanted to do Carnegie Mellon, like, and I would maybe have them look at where Carnegie Mellon is. I would have them look at Johns Hopkins and really think about, do they want to be in Baltimore? Um, Same with University of Maryland College Park. Do you really want to be there? Is there some compelling reason to be there? Or were you picking it because it's a fancy sounding school? And I would start, maybe knock like three of these off, and then replace them with likelier candidate schools that maybe you haven't heard of, but you'll probably find something exciting at those universities to be willing to apply, especially when it comes to highly competitive programs like computer science and engineering. I think it's really worth looking at. Um, some of you are probably going to be screaming like, "You didn't mention Purdue," and it's like Purdue's another one that's decently recognized these days, but it's also a public school. It's a land grant university, so again, slightly uh, advantaged towards students in the region, but you could also apply to Purdue. And I think that with that student's profile, they would have a decent shot at Purdue as well. Last question I have here: college application advice as a junior. Hello, I'm currently a junior in high school and I'm in need of some advice as I begin looking at colleges. Great, that's what you should be doing right now. I'm deciding on my top colleges and starting my application essays. The Common App and the UC's just announced what their prompts are, and there have been no changes. So I guess you could start your application essays now, but I feel like it's also a little early. But better early than late. I have a 3.81 unweighted GPA and a 4.36 weighted GPA. Okay, cool. 1B in freshman year English, that's okay. 2Bs in sophomore year pre-calc honors. Mm, and in first semester junior year, 1B in A push and 1C in AP bio. Ugh. Uh, they haven't said what their major is yet, because that AP bio could really hurt depending on what they're majoring in. Ah, I'm thinking of applying either to CS or CS plus Econ, hoping to go to UIUC because I'm in state. Awesome. They're in Illinois. Perfect. I feel like I won't get in with my current stats into pure computer science, and I don't have any clubs or extracurriculars related to econ in order to apply CS and econ double major. And the C and AP bio is really bringing down my academic profile in general. I'm also not feeling too confident in my second semester of AP bio. I'm going to pause right there and say C's aren't great, no matter what they're in. At least it's in a harder class like AP bio than in something else. Um, we would definitely want to try to, you know, maybe talk to some classmates and get some help, or if your family has the financial means to get a tutor, or to, maybe go to the student success center at your school if your school has one. Find some way of getting support in order to raise that AP bio grade. We want to see that go up. Sorry, your direction up. We want to see it go up, not down. Um, and we don't want it to stay stagnant at a C. That's really not a good look, regardless. Um, but if you were wanting to major in biological sciences or environmental science or something, I think that C and AP bio would be really, really, really bad. Given that you're a CS engineering student, like, it's not great, but it's also not the end of the world. It might exclude some of the highly selective or highly rejective colleges from being on our list, but it's also not going to send us to community college or something like that. Overall, my SAT score isn't really too good for CS programs at any school. 1,501 sitting, but 1,520 super score. I'm going to stop you right there and say a 1,520 super score is awesome. I would submit that score to any university I was applying to. Any. I don't care. Doesn't matter. Anything above 1,500 is excellent and worth submitting. When you look at colleges' middle 50% scores for the SAT right now, they're inflated because not everyone is submitting their scores. Only people with strong scores are submitting their scores. So that's artificially pushing up the middle 50% range. And colleges, especially the ones that have just recently announced that they're going back to requiring test scores to apply, they have straight up said that there were kids who didn't submit like 1450s or 1420s who didn't get in, and they would have gotten in had they submitted those scores. 1450, 1420, still really strong scores. Anything above 1500 puts you in the 99th percentile, 99th percentile of all SAT test takers nationally. Okay, let that sink in. The 99th percentile of all test takers nationally, if you're above a 1500. I would submit that score to any university I was applying to. Are you at the top echelons of their applicants? No. Right? There are some schools, especially CS engineering focused schools, where the top 25% are getting 800s on math. But you are going to be within their middle 50 or close enough to their middle 50 with that score. Like, I would not worry about it. With a 1520 super score, I mean, no, yeah, it doesn't matter. Even if you had like an 800 in reading and a 720 in math, like, you're above 700 in math. It's going to be good. So I would not, I wouldn't even take it again. This student says, I'm fine with trying one more time to take the SAT before the Common App opens in August to see if the digital SAT will hold any miracles for me. No, don't do it. Don't bother. Don't bother. Don't waste your time. You have a 15-20. Take it. As for my extracurriculars, I'm a semifinalist at the national level for the Science and History Bees, top 35 in the nation for Quiz Bowl, and I'm going to state for a club I'm in right now, in addition to tentative regionals and state competition for another club. I'm also in National Honor Society. I have no leadership and no internship for the summer. That we could fix, right? You would want to find something to do over the summer. It doesn't have to be an internship, but even if you're doing like some sort of self-directed project, either learning something new or trying to design something or build something, you really want to find a productive way to use part of your summer. I'm a huge advocate for resting, relaxing, and recharging over the summer, but it doesn't take 10 weeks to do that or 9 weeks to do that. Spend a month doing nothing and use the other month to do something productive. Or use every other day to do something productive and spend every other day doing nothing. I would really appreciate it if someone could give me any advice for applying either to CS or CS Econ at any Illinois school or Austin, UMich, Purdue, UCLA, and Cal, WashU St. Louis with my current situation. Except for Mich, those are the same schools that the previous person mentioned. Oh, well, and Purdue. I mentioned Purdue, but they did not. The UCs, WashU St. Louis, or oh, they're mentioning WashU St. Louis. Sorry, that's a different school, not UW. Um, but Illinois school, UIUC, probably U Chicago, right? UT Austin, that's the same. UMich, also highly competitive. Great university, but competitive. Purdue, really good for CS engineering and really anything math. So econ probably going to be okay. They do have a school of business. Um, UCLA and Berkeley. I guess if you're out of state and you're going to apply to the UCs, I guess those are the two. But UC Irvine is also really good. UC San Diego is also really good. Not to say the others aren't. This is from UC Davis, and I think UC Davis is awesome. But I totally understand why someone from out of state might not apply to Davis or some of the other UCs. Um, Again, I would really consider, especially with that C, branch out, branch out. Look at some of those other schools. Look at Rutgers. Um, Look at Penn State. Look at some of those technical schools. You could even look at Cal Poly SLO, San Luis Obispo. You could look at RPI, RIT, Wentworth Polytech. You could look at um, a lot of other options out there that will give you as good an education as Purdue, Austin, Mich, etc., on this list. If you're an Illinois kid, you might also consider, UIUC is going to be popular and therefore competitive, especially for CS engineering. U Chicago is going to be competitive no matter what you're applying to. You could look at some other schools in your state. DePaul University in Chicago it's a liberal arts college. They do have um, these majors, and so you could consider applying there, especially with that C in AP Bio. I think you would still have a good shot at getting in there. You could look at the University of Illinois Chicago if you're looking to stay in state. They're, again, depending on what the student is looking for. I can't craft a whole list for them because I don't know what regions of the country they want to be in or how big or small they want their school to be. Do they need academic supports, especially for, say, biology courses? Or do they need, a particular type of accommodation? Or, do they have some sort of personal situation where they need to be close to home? Or do they want to go as far away from mom and dad as humanly possible? Or can they afford to go, wherever? There are lots of questions that I would want to have answers to before crafting a list for this student. But just in general, given their situation, and they were far more detailed than the other student was, my advice would be the same. Look at some of these other schools out there. Um, the institutes of technology, the polytechnical institutes, and these not I don't want to call them liberal arts colleges because they're polytechnical schools, but they've got anywhere from 500 to 5,000 students, and so they are smaller schools, which really only one of these on the students list is a smaller school. And that could be for any number of reasons, but it could be that they want a larger university, in which case Penn State, Rutgers would also be good options. Cal Poly SLO would be a good option. Um, there are other institutions, Colorado Boulder would be a good one. I would even say if you want to apply to like ASU with that C in AP Bio, I don't know. You could probably get into the honors college at ASU if you wanted to apply to ASU's honors college. But again, I don't know if they want to be in Arizona. Being from Illinois, they get most of their seasons, and in Arizona, you're really only going to get one season, or I guess two. They have monsoon season also. Um, so really, it depends on what the student's looking for. But I would encourage them to branch out and find those other schools that are maybe less well known, but are still going to provide them with an excellent education in computer science, engineering, and or economics, since they're interested in that as a second choice, right? Um, and those are the questions that I have so far. Next time, I'm going to be talking a little bit more about the updated advice given the new testing landscape for the SAT and ACT. I'm going to talk about should you be taking them, when should you be taking them, um, what kind of scores you should submit, etc. I have all sorts of new advice and information about that. And then we'll also be talking about college essays and that sort of stuff, and how to build a list are coming down the pipe. And then, of course, if you have any questions and you want to send those in to me, you can send them to collegequestions@dawesacademics.com. And I would be happy to answer those in another segment of College Questions.